All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Ostrowski, and I work in Eagle's Environmental Support Division. And I welcome you to our lunchtime session today, PFAS 101, what every homeowner should know. So I'm glad to see a lot of people join us. We got about 184 people logged in right now, and many, many more will soon be logging in, I'm sure. So I'm glad to see so many people in attendance. I'm going to run through a couple housekeeping guidelines before we get started, and then I'm going to turn it over to our presenters. So first thing, all lines are muted at this point, which means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. I will explain a little bit later on how to ask questions and how we're going to unmute your mics later on. We are recording this webinar, so if you want to watch it again or share it with somebody else, everyone that registered will get a link to the recording soon after we're done. And want to point out as well that on your GoToWebinar toolbar, you've got a chat button and Anita Singh with our program. She's going to be chatting out information throughout this session. A couple of questions, or I guess information on how to ask a question in Zoom. You can type a question into the question and answer box on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll be getting to those once our presentations are done. If you want to voice your question, you can click the raise hand icon, and that'll show us that your hand is raised, and we will unmute your mic at that time. So you'll see a thing pop up and allow you to unmute your mic so you can ask your question. If you're on the phone with us today, and I'm just checking to see if we have any phone-in people, and doesn't look like we have any now, but if we do have people calling in on the phone and just listening in, they can click #2 on the phone and that'll raise their hand. So with that, I'm going to let Abby Hendershot go ahead and share your screen, and you can introduce yourself. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Jim. I will do that. Give me 2 seconds here to share my screen properly. Yes. And we want to share screen too. All right. You can see my screen. All good. And let me put it into presentation mode. Okay.
Yep.
Does that look, Jim?
Looks good.
It? Okay, excellent. So as let's go back to, we'll get through the housekeeping slides. So for introductions, today I want to thank you for coming. First of all, thanks for giving up your lunch hour to talk with us about this important topic and hopefully informational topic. This is something that's very near and dear to our hearts. And so today I am Abigail Hendershot. I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is. But today I have with me Jennifer Carney and Pam McQueer, who are both Citizen Advisory Workgroup members. Both of them are here as regular homeowners, as advocates, as people who have been affected by PFAS. And so I'm really excited to have them here to be able to share their stories with you. So Jennifer and Pam, I can't see if you're sharing your faces yet, but please do that. And then we're going to go through really quickly a pretty high level agenda today on what is PFAS? Why are we concerned about it? What does this mean to my family? What are the uses and sources of PFAS in our country? And why am I hearing about this today? We're going to talk about the 1 million people in our state who use groundwater for drinking water. We're going to get Jenny's perspective as a homeowner. We're going to talk about what the state of Michigan is doing for PFAS, and then talk with Pam about being an impacted citizen and what that has led her to do. And then talking about what you guys can do as citizens of our state. What does the normal homeowner need to do and think about for PFAS and for other contamination in our state? So again, I really appreciate you all being here and hope that you'll find this time useful. As Jim says, before I get started, make sure you go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to those at the end. We've set aside time to make sure we get to everybody's questions. So what is Mpart? Just real high level overview. The Michigan PFAS Action Response Team is a very unique collaboration structure. It has 7 different agencies, 7 different departments within the state of Michigan that are all under Mpart and each have a piece and a role in the collaboration for PFAS. And so this is a very unique multi-agency approach. It really hasn't been done much before. And so it's being modeled now because of the success of Mpart. It's being modeled across the country. But it really leads to that coordination and cooperation. And so we are able to use Mpart then to coordinate not only with the federal level, but also with local officials as well. And so it's really helped to direct the implementation of all of our PFAS actions in a very strategic way that maximizes our efficiency and maximizes the way we can protect public health in the long run. So what are PFAS, right? This is a family of chemicals that are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So when you hear PFAS, P-F-A-S, we're talking about the family of compounds that have very strong carbon fluorine bonds. So they're very stable. They're very tough to break down in the environment. And what they were used for and why they were started to be developed was in the late 1940s, they found that this strong carbon fluorine bond was actually great for repelling water, for resisting greases, fats. And so we have a lot of uses of those PFAS compounds already today in our everyday society that we'll talk about here in a minute. But we know that there's at least 5,000 of these or more of these compounds in our society today. So but the concern with PFAS, though, the biggest concern with PFAS and why you're hearing so much about it is that we're finding PFAS chemicals in a lot of different ways in our soils, in our air, in our water, but they don't break down. It's very difficult to get them to biodegrade. They don't readily do it in a normal environment. And so they have the potential to stay around a very, very long time. And what we're finding is that they do bioaccumulate in our bodies. So we can actually, as we ingest water that might have PFAS in it, or as we ingest food that may have PFAS, we can build that up in our bodies over time, which we know can lead to some health effects. We know that although the information is still lacking for the toxicity and the studies for PFAS, we know that some of the early studies are indicating that there are indeed health effects, which we're going to go through here in a slide or two. But the other thing to know is at the federal level, there really are no standards for PFAS yet. The federal government, EPA, has not come out with anything more than a health advisory. And so the state of Michigan has actually taken action in that stead. So why is this important to my family? Why should you guys care? Why are you logged in today to listen to this? It's because your drinking water is the primary route that how you could get PFAS into your body. Ingestion, we call it the ingestion pathway. And so drinking water, food, contact, anything where you could ingest it in your body is the primary route and our biggest concern for PFAS. Because some of those health effects, when you start adding on all the different ways that you can get PFAS, we know that there's health outcomes that can be associated with PFAS in the long run. We know that there's reduced fertility, higher cholesterol, thyroid disease, liver damage. You could have certain types of cancers. We know that not all exposures to PFAS lead to some sort of a health outcome, but it does definitely, the longer you're exposed and the more concentration you're exposed to, obviously, the higher the chance of an adverse health outcome. And so we're not going to get into that too much today, but I want to show you a video next about what some of this means to have contamination potentially in your area. So hopefully this video will work. And there we go. Let's make sure the video and the sound works. It's about 2 minutes.
Sources of PFAS could include unregulated dump sites, landfills, firefighting foams, and factory waste. PFAS can seep through the ground and eventually mix in and flow along with the groundwater, the water that can be found underground. The PFAS that is in groundwater is called a plume. The amount of PFAS at any given point in a plume can vary as the groundwater moves along. Here we see the red section of the plume showing higher amounts of PFAS and the purple section showing lower amounts. This is one reason for potential differences between test results. The plume will move over time. As the plume reaches these wells, the amount of PFAS found in the water could change. Another reason is well depth. Here, the first well is shallower than the others and is drawing water that has the highest amount of PFAS. The second well is deeper and is drawing water with lower amounts of PFAS. The third well is the deepest and is not within the plume. No PFAS is found in that well. In addition to depth of the well, the type and structure of soil and rock around your well can alter how a PFAS plume can get to your well. PFAS can move easily through sand or gravel. However, soils with a lot of clay in them or some types of bedrock can prevent PFAS from getting to your well, or at least slow it down. How your well was constructed and how much water you use can also make a difference. This is a simple example of a plume. Plumes often have different shapes and move at different speeds. Some wells may be closer to the plume than others. Wells that draw water from the center of the plume area could have higher amounts of PFAS in their water. Lastly, consider the household products you use that might contain PFAS. These products have been used to waterproof, stain-proof, and create nonstick surfaces. They're used in most households. Products include many laundry products, carpets and upholstery treatments and sprays, waterproof clothing, and some cosmetics. Wastewater containing PFAS, such as carpet cleaning wastewater, can go down your drains and out into your septic field, and may result in low levels of PFAS in well water.
And that is the Michigan.gov PFAS response is the Mpart website. So I would encourage you to check that out. Oops. Let's go to the next slide. So what we want to talk about is, just like in the video that talked about a groundwater source for PFAS. And there's a lot of potential sources already in our environment, in our normal world. And so what I want to point out today is some of the typical PFAS sources that we see. So the first one, the most obvious that we think of are, industries that might use PFAS for scotch guarding fabric, or for chrome platers that might use mist suppressants, or for other types of, normal manufacturing. Now, most of them, may not have any releases, any spills, but occasionally that does happen, and you may get direct discharges to the groundwater. You could get, some sort of a waste time to give, to have waste going into the rivers or streams, through an NPDES permit, or it could get discharged to the wastewater treatment plant. We have all of these different types of sources. The other big one that you've probably heard about are the firefighting foams, what we call AFFF, the aqueous film forming foam. There's two different types, and the one type that's used for hot petroleum fires, so for like aviation fires or combustible petroleum fires, does contain high levels of PFAS. And so those PFAS concentrations do cause groundwater contamination, which we're investigating around the state. We also know that we're finding PFAS as it passes through from the industries into the wastewater treatment plants. We see PFAS in our landfills, from our landfill leachate, as well as for those products that are disposed in landfills. Of course, you can see how this cycle is, that one just passes to another, passes to another. But what you also see here is that our residential homes, just like the video talked about, can have low-level PFAS in our septic fields, just from our general household use of washing garments that might be PFAS treated, or doing our own carpet cleaning, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different things in our homes that have varying levels of PFAS. And so all of these different sources have the potential to cause groundwater contamination. And that's part of the reason that we're really here today, is for Drinking Water Awareness Week, it's really important that people take a minute and think about what is my well, what's in my well, where is my well situated, is it at potential risk, is there anything else around me that might be at risk? Because we have over 1.2 million groundwater wells in the state. That's 25% of our Michigan population drinks actual groundwater, myself included. We drink groundwater because we're not near a municipal system. And so most of the time that's fine. That's great. Everybody likes our natural aquifers. But what you can see here is that we usually think, well, if you have a rural area, yes, they wouldn't have municipal water, they would just have groundwater. But what we don't really understand is that actually there's a lot of people even in the urban areas that have their own groundwater wells. So this particular map, you can't necessarily see it from this figure, is a picture of Lansing. So all of these dots over here, the smaller purple dots are all the homes with private and residential drinking water wells. And then the larger dots might be community supply wells. So they could be either larger facilities that might have their own potable water supply, or they could be some of the city systems. So there's a lot of wells just in this little snapshot of the Lansing area, which I think should surprise some people. The other thing is, if you look at, and I gave you the link at the back of the slides for this, you'll have the link to this WellLogic database so that you can go look up your area as well. But there's also environmental layers in this. So if we take this same snapshot and we go to the next slide and we say, turn off the water wells and turn on the environmental layers. So all the sites of environmental contamination, all of our underground storage tanks, that would be your gas station sites, all of our solid waste disposal sites, those would be your landfills, hazardous waste sites, all those kinds of things. If you turn those all on and look at the same layer, you can see that there's a lot of potential for there to be drinking water wells at risk based on these contamination sites. And Mpart does its best to try to make sure that we, sample as many wells and understand what's going on, but obviously we can't do it all. And that's why I think it's really important for homeowners to know that, you're really responsible for your drinking water well. You're responsible for the maintenance, you're responsible for the upkeep, and you're responsible for the testing. And so we want to give you the tools to know where to go to get some of that testing. But I want you to hear Jenny's story, because I've asked her to come on today and to be a participant in this and help us understand what she wishes she had known as a homeowner and now as part of our Citizen Advisory Workgroup. Jenny? Go to the next slide. There we go. Hi. All right, you can just tell me when to advance.
Okay. And you can go to the next one. There we go. So back at the end of 2010, I purchased my home in Belmont, which is right next to Rockford, with my husband and my 2 children. 7 years after living in our home, I was sitting right there in that auditorium. That's my old high school auditorium. I was listening to government officials, including Abby, sharing this contamination situation that we had. And I was looking up at the screen at that map, and my house was in that little purple circle. And I was being explained to there was this dump site and these homes may be affected. And I thought it was crazy because I live like a mile away from that dump site. I didn't understand how that was even going to affect me. I, at first didn't really take it serious. The more I got to know about PFAS, geology, contamination, I knew that we really did have a situation. You can do the next slide. So what I wish that I knew back then was your water source. So my extent of water knowledge was that I knew I had a well because I didn't have a water bill. I didn't really know what that meant other than I didn't have to pay for my water. So once I learned more about how it worked, I learned that the all natural water coming from underneath my home may not be the healthiest option. I had this false sense of security that it was because it wasn't ran through some big facility, through all these pipes. But I didn't realize that facility actually does a lot of testing, which typical homeowners do not. Knowing a little bit more about geology, the Mpart has come up with a lot of really good graphics like that video that Abby just showed to help you understand that water from much farther away than just a mile can impact your home. My home happens to sit in between the dump site and the Rogue River. So the water is flowing under my home. Just like in basic science class, you learn that water always flows towards the next bigger body of water. And so it made sense. And I was able to pull my well report. And although I learned that my well was extremely deep, almost 300 feet, all of our soil was sand and rock. So it provided that really easy conduit for the PFAS to pass over. Your local history, this was something that I found surprising, that there was and there wasn't a lot of people who knew about this Wolverine Worldwide dump site. It was kind of a thing back in the day that people knew it was there. There was some contention, and then it wasn't spoke about for years. I guess those kind of things, if we could have these more brought to light, you would know to ask questions. You would have the choice whether to put this in your body or not, or whether to test and whether to do something about it. You can do the next slide. So you think you have a problem. It's scary. You don't know what to do. I remember in 2017, there was really no resources. I tried to look up what I could. There wasn't really anything known or shared about PFAS, which made it even more scary because we literally did not know what to do. We just stopped drinking our water and started drinking bottled water because that was the only option. The state did testing on our wells, found out that it was really high, and the filtration, the science did change enough to provide that filtration like you see in the picture there. That's the CAWG filter that you may hear about. There's also some under the sink filters if your levels are lower, and that will provide just that one point of use filtration. What eventually for my home, we were able to connect to that city water. So our well is removed. So now we do have a water bill, but we don't have to worry about filtration or testing or contamination. So that's a big peace of mind. Another thing is your health. I had gone through a couple years of a lot of different crazy health effects. I went to a variety of doctors, spent a ton of money on testing. Nobody could come up with any reason for why I was having a variety of health effects. And then I found out about my water. After being on clean water for a couple of years, almost all of my health effects have gone away. So while industry may find it expensive to clean up, it's saving a lot of us money with not missing work, not missing family time, not paying those medical bills. The support, I left that at the end because that was reflecting back on all of this. That was the biggest piece that I want to share. Is this took like a mental toll on my whole neighborhood, my community, in the widest variety of ways. The amount of anxiety that we all have, and we've all taken it in just the most various ways, and it's all okay. And I think that was the thing that nobody really said, was it's okay to be fearful of everything and then start to digest it and say, okay, I can have some control over this, because there is more knowledge out there. So that, I think my bigger thing is to just get support for this. This is one of your basic needs in life. And when it gets ripped out from underneath you, it does kind of take a toll on you. So I do want to put out there too, that the state of Michigan has done a fantastic job at taking the lead in what you should do when you have a crisis like this. You don't cover it up, you bring it to light, do testing, and you do what you can to fix it. So I think that we should really rely heavily on Mpart and the work that they're doing, because it's really been helpful.
Thank you, Jenny. And I think that points out that the collaboration that Mpart provides goes to our citizens as well. It's not just a collaboration of the state's going to do everything. It's a collaboration of what the community does together to really affect the needed change and the protection of public health, because that's really what we're trying to do the most of is our protection of public health is like the number one main goal. But in order to do that, we have to know where the PFAS is in our environment. We have to understand where the sources are. We have to understand how the PFAS actually moves through our environment. So the fate and transport of PFAS. We have to study the ecological effects. What does it do to our fish? What does it do to our rivers? What does it do to the biota and the food chain? So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think when you leverage it all together with the collaboration of an agency like Mpart, then you can magnify the exponential effects of really positive change. And that's why, part of our mission today is to continue that mission of change. So I'm going through this list, but the other thing that Michigan has done is really develop standards. I talked before about there were no federal standards for PFAS. Like Jenny says, back in 2017, when we started that investigation for Wolverine in North Kent County, there were no cleanup levels at all, no drinking water standards. We had some health advisories through EPA. But we did not have any cleanup criteria or anything to enforce. And so in 2018, we adopted the 70 parts per trillion, and in 2020, we actually got Michigan's the first time we've ever done our own maximum contaminant levels for drinking water, but we now have actual promulgated standards for Michigan's drinking water. And so that affects all of the municipal systems have to, meet these standards. And so these were all standards that were scientifically developed. And so you'll see PFOS, which was the main contaminant in Jenny's case, is now 16 parts per trillion. PPT is parts per trillion. And these others, all 7 compounds then are also the same standards that we use for groundwater cleanup. So these would be the same standards based on the best toxicological data and the science that shows us what the health effects are. So this is one of the few states in the country that actually have their own standards for PFAS and for drinking water standards, which we're quite proud of. So in addition to the drinking water standards, we've also done a lot of sampling of lakes and streams. We're sampling fish, we're sampling foam, we're sampling the water. There's a lot of work that's being done in those things. Check out the Mpart website if you want to see more of that. Eat Safe Fish Guide. As homeowners, as hunters, as fishermen, I hope you know about the Eat Safe Fish Guide. If you just type in Eat Safe Fish, Michigan, it should come up. But all the water bodies in the state, most of them have been sampled. Most of them currently PFOS is not the main driver for most of the fish in the state. It continues to be mercury as the contaminant that drives the fish advisories in most of our state, but there are a couple of water bodies where PFOS has actually come up as a contaminant of concern. So this list are all of the different watersheds that we're actually sampling just this year. So all of these watersheds are going to be sampled for fish and continue to be sampled for fish. And so we're going to be continuing to keep track of that data and look and see, are we seeing the concentrations in the fish coming down? Because now we've reduced a lot of sources. Additionally, we're looking at all of the PFAS sites in the state. We are now up to 166 different PFAS sites that have been identified in the state. We know there's more. And when you look at this map compared to the rest of the country, you might think, wow, Michigan's really contaminated, but Michigan's really one of the few states that's actually looking in a comprehensive way, in a coordinated, comprehensive way. So it's really important to keep that in mind. We're not more contaminated, we just are actually looking. So, but in looking, we're finding residents like Jenny, like Pam, that have been affected by PFAS. And so it's really important for the state to continue that investigation across, all the other sites that we haven't gotten to. So in talking about sources, I want to let Pam tell you her story next. So Pam, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Abby. I'd like to say today that it's my pleasure to join all of you this afternoon. And just as Jenny, there's many of us that have our individual stories. Hopefully we make an impact to become strong advocates to help other residents get involved or get informed. In this slide here that we're looking at, that was my second public meeting that I attended. The first one was I went due to the fact that I had heard that through our media that we potentially had a contaminated issue here in the city that I reside in. In a neighboring town, my father worked most of his working years after leaving the Navy at a local paper mill and was contaminated and had passed away due to asbestosis. That's originally what took me to the first meeting, was that I wanted to make sure that if there was a way that as a daughter of someone who had slaved his way or, through working through the paper mills, that my dad's story would never be left unheard. So I attended the first meeting. At that meeting, we had state and federal agencies that was there. They had asked anyone in the audience to raise their hand if they'd ever been diagnosed with a rare disease or a rare disorder. And after sitting there for a few minutes, I decided, am I going to raise my hand or am I not? And as faith would have it, I raised my hand. When I was called upon, I gave the name of my very rare eye disease. I was the first in the United States with my eye disease that left me during the active state totally blind for 6 months. And I was amazed. I was amazed that one of the representatives from MDHHS actually recognized the name of my disease. So shortly after the meeting, I was pulled to the side and was questioned by ASTDR, MDHS, and Allegheny County health officials. And from that moment on, it was life-changing for me. Just as Jenny, for 40 some years, I was the patient that no one had any answers for. They could never figure out what was going on with me. What once was believed in my eye disease was caused by upper respiratory. It was through a woman by the name of Mary Clark that started pushing for this investigation in our town that has become heroic to me. If it was not for this investigation, I would have never known what had happened to me. Unfortunately, at the end of that day, I realized that I had came to a meeting and was clueless that I lived at ground zero. I resided right next door to the mother liquor ponds of a pulp paper mill. And so my story began at that second, when you see me in sash, I attended the second meeting to stand up. I had realized that evening that I could not, even though I was a victim, I guess by guilty as charged where I resided, I didn't have to stay a victim. I chose to become an advocate. So representing our state as Mrs. Southern Michigan America, I came out and decided to roll up my sleeves and become an advocate. no longer a victim. This is the home where I resided. The picture of the water just clearly indicates what my bath water, my drinking water, and the water that was on our property that we would do yard work, as well as a lot of foam that I came into contact with. And as I said, little did I know that residing there was going to be life-changing for me. Next slide, please. So as I rolled up my sleeves and I decided to come out and to become an advocate, it was very obvious to me at the very first town hall meeting that there wasn't much trust in communities that was impacted for the agencies. And I decided to do my part, excuse me, to step up and hopefully make a difference. So I challenged EGLE, I challenged the EPA, Allegan County Health Department, to allow me to follow with them for my community, to be that liaison and to be the voice and the eyes out in the field, to take pictures to show what does it look like, you know, when they're out here doing this, and to educate my public, to be able to come back as a strong voice to say, I was there, I witnessed it. And this was life-changing for me. I had no idea the passion and all the work and the effort that is put into, you know, these type of testing from all the agencies. But it started to become very clear to me that although there was a lot of mistrust, it's not until you're out there with these people to see what they go through on a day-to-day basis that I knew then that my voice had to be stronger than ever, that it was going to become knowledge would be power. So the next slide, please. After that first testing, we had a false positive come back. We found out later of dioxins that was present in the water. I was amazed at the prompt attention that Allegan County Health, MDHHS, and EGLE had gave to my community, and immediately put people on bottled water, supplied them with bottled water, and had brought filters to the home to do what they could do at that point until we could run further testing. Next slide, please. And through this journey in the investigation state and all the ground sampling and the water sampling, the agencies called upon me to become that voice and that the liaison for my community. And I did so with great honor. So this is a clip when I started my conversations with the media, that I felt that the best gift that I could give to my community, not only was to have my eyes on what was going on, but to teach them that knowledge is power, that they too could become an advocate, not only for themselves or their neighbors, but to realize that, you know, as in The Wizard of Oz, we all learn there's no place like home. We all have ruby slippers, and there's a time when we need to dust them off and we need to click them together. And this was one of those times where I was going to teach my community that you need to understand the terminology that's being involved. There was so much fear within my community. They hadn't a clue that there was a thing called remediation. They only knew that what was coming down the pipe, if indeed it was true, their house was impacted, then the value of their home was going to go down. What were they to do? Could they afford to have a new well? And what about our health? Let's take that into the next, into the next step. When I was able to communicate with them and be out in the field and share my story with them, I began to see hope. I seen hope in their eyes. The fear started to subside. And it is through, people's involvement, such as mine and Jenny's to get involved, is that we began to see what, the fear and how it plays havoc with our community's emotions. That can start to subside when we are able to supply them with the proper channels and resources that can be trusted. So we can go to the next slide, please. And that led me into a conversation that was brought to my attention where I was approached to become a part of the Citizens Advisory Workgroup. And I have to tell you, within a matter of seconds, my answer was yes. I knew that through becoming a part of this work group, that not only at my community level, but the other residents that had taken a seat on this work group as well, they too had their stories, and together we could collaborate, and we could become that voice. As I said earlier, one voice will never be enough. It's not loud enough. And it has been an honor for me to be a part of this work group. And I have to tell you that I take it with great pride, take it serious every day. I love to see that the other members, they're willing to challenge and to work alongside of these state and federal agencies to be the voices of our community. And that's not a job that I take very lightly. Although I wore a crown and a sash for many years and I represented many charities and many organizations, there's never been a title that I think that I have taken more proudly than to be a part of this work group. It is my duty, I feel, to come back to my community, to be the liaison, to tell them you can put your fears aside, because if you don't know where to go to get the answers, I do. And if you do not want to step up and speak for yourself, I'll be your voice. I'll be your feet, I'll be your eyes, I'll be your ears, and I'll be your voice. So I have to tell you that it is with great pride and honor that I've come to know each and every one of these state and federal agencies, that they've been willing to allow me to come along, work beside them as we've tested out here for the water and the soil sampling. My story is only one of many. And we have a choice in life when sometimes we're dealt a hand that we're not proud to hold. But I refuse to be a victim of what happened to me. God gave me some sight that I was able to regain. And for that, I will pay that forward the rest of my life. I will be the voice for my community. And until I no longer am here on earth, this paper mill will never forget my name. They'll never forget the community that they impacted. So thank you for allowing me to share my story today. To the agencies that are on today, those of you that have helped educate me, answer my 1,000,002 questions, always welcomed. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Pam. Wonderful story. And I think that's why, as I said, the collaboration for Mpart is so powerful, because it's not just a collection of state agencies. We're leveraging this to make sure we've included communities, we've included our very communities and homeowners in these conversations. That's how we all become better. And so I want to use Pam and Jenny's stories to ask you some basic questions as homeowners. You know, do you know if you have a private well or are you on municipal water? Easiest way, as Jenny said, is do you pay a water bill? If you don't pay a water bill, then you probably have a private well. You know, do you know how deep it is? Do you know what does your plumbing look like? Do you already have some sort of filtration system on your private drinking water well? Is it a carbon filter or is it just a water softener? Water softeners won't do anything for PFAS. How can I have my water tested for PFAS? We're going to talk about that in just a second. Are there other things that I should have my water tested for? So I personally live out in the country and my home is on an old potato field. Should I have it tested for nitrates? Probably. Are there other, naturally occurring metals in the area? Any other general water chemistry? Those are all good questions that you should consider as you're thinking about what to test for. So we want to give you, here's the link, because there's a lot of information here, but here's a link for sampling and lab information for homeowners. There's a whole list of labs here that will do PFAS testing. They've been all certified to do good testing, make sure that it's appropriate and that it's done by the current standards. So if you click on the link, you'll get those testing things. This is all on the Mpart website. So you can go just type in Mpart to your Google Drive and catch that. Very easy. The other thing we should talk about though is filters. So both Jenny and Pam talked about bottled water. That's an option, but the other option is putting an actual filter on your kitchen sink. And so I have one of these in my house. This is a little 3-stage carbon filter. It is rated for PFAS removal. And so if you want to buy a filter online, look for one that is NSF or ANSI certified, standard 53 or P473 for PFOA and PFOS reduction. It's going to say that, you know, it meets current standards. You got to do that. And then you got to follow the manufacturing instructions. Make sure you don't put the filter on and then leave it there for 5 years. The manufacturer instructions are replacing these carbon filters every 6 months, not because they won't remove the PFAS, but because you can get bacteria to build up and you don't want to have it become some sort of a other health hazard based on the bacterial growth. So that's important to know. So we've thrown some of these resources, those couple of maps I showed you of the drinking water wells and the environmental mapper we have. These are all great websites that can show you where sites of environmental contamination are, where water wells are. And then the last one, the PFAS responses, are Mpart website. And so I see we're at about 1:45. I want to leave it open for questions because I think it's really important. Your questions are going to be the most important pieces of this. So as Jim said, or maybe Jim wants to take back over, looks like we've got a lot of questions in the Q&A. And if you want to raise your hand, feel free, or we'll start working our way through the Q&A box. And so should I stop sharing right now then?
I just shared my screen, so
okay,
you're good, Abby.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks for the great presentation, everyone. Yeah, like Abby said, we got a ton of questions that have come in, and we got over 300 people that are on the line. So we're gonna take a quick, we'll try our best to get through as many as we can. And I put up on the screen here how you ask a question. You can raise your hand or put your question in the question box. And please keep an eye on that chat. Anita's been putting in a lot of different links. And we'll follow up after this webinar with an email to all the registrants and send you all the links as well in case you missed one. That way you can have
and we should probably say, Jim, is there a way we can share this entire presentation with all the participants who registered?
Yeah. So we will share a recording link, and we'll also we can share the slides if we can get them to a level that's shareable.
Yes.
All
I
right.
mean, obviously the video won't be shareable with a thing, but we can share the presentation so that you can have those links in case you didn't write them down. Otherwise, like I said, go to the Mpart website. That's probably the easiest way. So, okay. Do we want to start with a specific set of questions?
Yeah, so we had some questions here on filters, but I think you already answered those because those came in early. Question about where PFAS accumulates in the body. Another person asked about they have a thyroid disease. I'm wondering if it's associated with PFAS.
Yeah, I think, you know, your best discussion would be to call the Department of Health and Human Services and talk with one of the toxicologists, because I don't believe that PFAS actually accumulate in a certain part of the body. It is throughout the, it's in your blood, and so it travels throughout the body. But definitely when you're talking about disease and potential health effects, we want to have you talk directly with a toxicologist. So maybe Nita or one of our helpers can help put that DHHS hotline in the chat so you guys can have that number.
Yeah, we'll drop it in there. Is there a specific test that I should be asking to get done from the doctor?
You know, there isn't you can get a blood test done for PFAS, but that doesn't necessarily show what you were historically exposed to, and it's not going to necessarily show you what you might come down with in the future. So it's not necessarily the best way to do it. I would start with the toxicologist over at DHHS and talk with them further about your situation.
Yeah. Okay, I'll take a couple more questions from our question board, then we'll go to people with their hands raised. Can you provide us with where in the state PFAS treatment will be required at a municipal treatment plant?
So all of the wastewater treatment plants in the state have already gone through some testing, and where those wastewater treatment plants did not meet the state standards for discharge, they're already working through that process to make sure that they can bring down their influent concentrations. So the wastewater treatment plants aren't the best place to treat PFAS. So they've gone to their industrial users upstream that actually discharge to the wastewater treatment plant, and working with those industrial users to make sure they can reduce their PFAS contribution down to, very, very low levels, so that the wastewater treatment plant then can meet their discharge levels. Hopefully that was the question.
Yeah, another follow-up question on that too was about landfills. And so will we be requiring pre-treatment landfills, or how are we going to regulate landfills?
That's a good question. We're working on strategies for landfills, but again, same thing with the wastewater treatment plants. We've done an initial assessment for landfills, for leachate that might go to wastewater treatment plants. And so we know which of our landfills are going to have trouble meeting discharge limits. And so we're starting to work through that process of understanding what's, how do we help them the best, and what is a good treatment technology for leachate. Can't say that we have enough time to actually get into all that today, but it's a good question.
Yeah, right. Questions about things people use at home. Here's one: can you characterize the risk to human health posed by regularly using non-stick cookware at home that might contain PFAS? Is that something you've looked into, or we've looked into?
I don't think we've actually. I don't know that I can specifically say that we've assessed the risk. I just know that, our strategy for Mpart is reduce the exposure, reduce the use of it, so that we don't have to worry about the risks long-term. So if at all possible, you can get your cookware that doesn't have that Teflon surface, or doesn't have a PFAS coated surface, that would be the best option.
Right. We're going to go to our hands raised, and I'm going to let Scott see. Scott, you have a question. You could unmute your mic and go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yeah. With regard to the use of like the carbon filters, with the EPA's pending legislation establishing maximum contaminant levels and classifying PFOS, PFOA as hazardous waste, if we use a carbon filter to strip out the PFAS, will it have to be disposed of as hazardous waste, or can it just be thrown into the regular trash can?
That's a great question, Scott. So if you're just talking about a small under the sink 3-stage filter like we showed on the slide, that can just go into your regular trash. That's going to be captured in the carbon, and your regular trash can handle that. If you have the large canisters where we use the granular activated carbon, what we call GAC, if you use that for treatment systems for remediation and stuff, then that does have to be properly disposed of, sampled, and either regenerated. There's a couple of different ways that they do that, but that's a kind of a different topic and a different solution. So large quantities of it could potentially have to be handled differently.
All right, thanks, Scott. Another personal hand up, Arthur W. Arthur, I muted your line if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, my question is, here in Flint, we had water crisis, and we had 4 different sites that had high levels of PFAS. And being that 3M, they checked their taps and their water mains, and they changed their water mains. How do we get Eagle to check our water at the tap, not at the plant, but at the tap, to see if we were exposed to PFAS? Because in the ATSDR report, it states that you can have all different types of cancers, and we have had an influx of different cancers here in the city of Flint, and no one has investigated to see if we were exposed to PFAS. So how do the city or the people go about getting Eagle to come in and MDHHS to do a cancer cluster study to see if we were exposed to PFAS and the high levels of TTHM?
Good question, Arthur. Okay, so let me break that question down a little bit. So in Flint, the public water supply, like all the other public water supplies, municipal water supplies across the state, would have been tested as part of the statewide testing initiative that was started in 2018 and actually continues to this day. So all of the state waters are actually tested on a regular basis. So if I'm understanding what you're saying, you're worried about if it was non-detect at the plant, you're worried about there being some change or some sort of potential PFAS getting into the pipes, then getting to your house.
So
Because
let me give you an example.
Okay.
Lapeer molding in October 2015 was found to have 17,000 parts per billion PFAS coming out of their molding plant. And also in October 2015, they found that Oil Chem had pumped 43 million gallons of leachate in Outfall 1. And both of these are in front of the intake to the water plant that was distributing water to the residents here in the city of Flint. So how do we find out if they were manipulating the test results for lead and everything else? How do we know if all this was coming through the plant into our water system? Is there any type of way that we can get Eagle to come in and check at our water system, being that PFAS is a forever chemical and it doesn't go away, so it would still be in our system if it did come through the plant?
Great question. Okay, so the statewide testing that was done was not actually tests that were conducted by Flint. We would have sent our own contractors out to collect those samples, both at the influent and the effluent, so coming into the plant and going out of the plant. So if, in the case of, if there were a situation where we actually found PFAS, so like parchment, we did find very high levels of PFAS in the actual municipal water. And so that was a situation where we took immediate action and put that entire town on bottled water until that could be remedied. But if there was PFAS, you're right, PFAS does stick around longer, although it would be flushing through that treatment plant. We would be seeing it both on the influent and the effluent. And so those initial samples were all collected. The first couple of years of samples were collected by Eagle. So we have very high confidence in those sample results. And I know that I don't know about your second question, but the Lapeer sampling has been taken care of, because that was one where the actual company themselves had to put treatment on theirs to stop that discharge, because it was very high levels and we knew that contamination was occurring. So, but if you want to pass me, Arthur, if you want to pass and put your contact information in the chat, I'll get back to you with the rest of the information, because that's a lengthier conversation and I don't want to shortchange your answer. So if you wouldn't mind sharing your information, we can get back to you with the rest of the answer for making sure I understand all the nuances that go with Flint, because I don't know if they're on monthly sampling, quarterly sampling, or annual sampling, but I want to share those results with you.
All right, thanks, Abby. Keep this moving, because we got lots of questions in. I only got a couple more minutes for questions, so I'm going to take a couple other ones that I think people might be interested in here. This person's saying that last year there was an MLive story about PFAS in food, eggs and cake mix, dry goods, things like that, where levels are thousands of times greater than health levels. What is the state of Michigan doing to limit PFAS in food?
That is a great question. So Mpart is looking at all of the different ways that PFAS can get into food. First of all, we have to understand where it's coming from. Why is it getting into, why do we see it in food? And I think the other thing is we don't have really good standardized ways of testing food for PFAS. So right now we've got some limited studies on some homegrown crops. We've got some limited studies on some cornfields. We're trying to understand what this means to have PFAS, because not all PFAS, there's different, so some of the PFAS family are 8 chain carbons, 10 chain carbons, 2 chain carbons. And so the length of those carbon fluorine bonds is going to change the toxicity and the availability of it for different plants. And so some of it might get taken up into the root structure, some of it might get taken up into the plants. It's a complex thing, and we're just at the beginning of trying to understand what the implications are for PFAS in food and crops, and then by the manufacturing of of the more processed foods. So I think we're going to keep studying it, because we don't have enough information yet to really understand, nor do we have enough data to even go about setting standards for that kind of stuff. As I said, Mpart's motto is to reduce the amount of PFAS in the environment, reduce the amount of exposure to our residents, and make sure we minimize, the future uses of PFAS so that we don't have the continued exposure.
Okay, thanks. Last question. Cost for help. Is there any help for testing for PFAS in terms of, paying for testing? It's expensive.
We should have mentioned that the typical cost for a PFAS test for a certified lab is like around $275. And that's a home testing kit that you get mailed to your home. You take your sample and then you ship it back, and they give you good certified results. We do not currently have any like slush fund to do homeowner testing. Right now, we're focusing on those homes that are around known areas of investigation, just because we really have very limited funds for this kind of thing. So that's why it's really important for people to take ownership of their wells so that we can see what's available. I do know that there are some nonprofits that are potentially looking into that whole funding issue. But at this point, we don't have anything specifically for that.
We've got a lot of great questions in here, but we're going to have to wrap it up because I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I will share the questions that came in with Abby and her team at Mpart, so they can take a look and get back to people as necessary. So Abby, you want to wrap us up?
I just really appreciate everybody showing up today. I appreciate all of you as homeowners taking the time to listen to this, being interested, I really want to continue a grassroots effort almost of getting people aware of their drinking water and what actions you should be taking, and understanding what's going on in our state for drinking water. So appreciate your time. Check out the Mpart website. Check out the Clean Water Awareness Week website. There's a lot of resources out there that we didn't even have time to touch on, but feel free to contact us. I think, if you do the Mpart website, there's a lot of resources, and we're happy to help, happy to answer questions. And as Pam said, and Jenny says, is you guys are your advocates. Help us spread this message and tell this story for all of our future, homeowners and citizens. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Abby, and thanks to Jenny and Pam for joining us as well and sharing their story and being part of this webinar. It's nice to have somebody else on these. It's great. All right, so just want to let you all know that we'll be following up with an email to everyone who registered. We're going to include a lot of links in that email, so be ready, because you might have missed some, and I know we shared a lot of them. And we'll also share a link to the recording when it's available. It'll be up on our YouTube channel, along with all of our public meeting recordings and videos that we have out there for you to look at. So thank you all for spending some time with us today. And have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.